several more ingredients to add to the pot that's cooking up, with the possibility and in an endeavor to answer the questions that have been posed. Those questions are, what is this that lies beyond human love, or the loves of existence? And what is the absence of illusion? Now, you'll possibly remember that story of Mullah Nasruddin, who was hauled up before the Sultan of the day, who said to the Mullah, "Mullah, I've heard that you're a great mystic with great abilities of insight. Tell me something insightful and mystical immediately, otherwise I'll chop your head from your shoulders." So Mullah Nasruddin looked up at the sky for a moment, and then he said to the Sultan, "Oh, great monarch, I see your mother and father sitting on thrones of gold, being fed by the handmaidens of the gods." Well, the Sultan was very impressed. He said, "Mullah, Mullah, tell me, where do your mystical, insightful powers come from?" And the Mullah said, "Fear. Fear will do it every time." Then there was an advisor to a great king. He was called Birbal. He was the closest confidant and counselor of this great king. But before Birbal came along, the closest advisor and counselor to the king was his Baba. And when Birbal came along and became so close to the Sultan, the Baba got very jealous, decided that he would plot to get rid of Birbal. So he did. One day he came to the king when he was about to cut the king's hair, and he said, "Great sire, last night I had a dream. I dreamt that I went to heaven and met your mother and father, the late king and queen. And they were very happy there, but they were disappointed because they did not have a close counselor and advisor. And they would be very pleased if someone could be sent to them to take that position. And great sire, we know there's no greater counselor and advisor in the kingdom than Birbal himself." So, of course, hearing this, the Sultan said, well, we just have to send Birbal to heaven then, don't we? And so Birbal was called up to the Sultan to say that this is what was going to happen. Well, Birbal had a thought for a moment, and then he said, yes, sire, I'm very happy to go to heaven and become the advisor and counselor to your mother and father. But would you give me a month to prepare for my ascendance, which of course would be on a bier in fire, and of course, if you don't mind, I would like to have it in my own front garden." And so this was given to him, a month to prepare. So, unbeknownst to anyone, when the framework was made on which Birbal would be placed and the fire lit, he built a tunnel to his house. And the day arrived when he was to be sent up to heaven. So he was put on the frame of the hole, of course, that had been dug. And he sat on the bier, and the fire was lit. And well, as soon as the smoke came around, and it was quite obvious that it was doing its job, he just slid down into his tunnel and went into his house. And there he stayed for a month. And he let his hair grow long and his beard grow ragged and scruffy. And after a month, he came out and went to the Sultan. And the Sultan was greatly pleased to see him. "What are you doing here, Birbal?" And Birbal said, "Yes, I ascended to heaven, and indeed I saw your mother and father, and they were very pleased to see me. But it really wasn't a counselor and advisor that they need. It was a Baba." And so, of course, post haste, the Baba was put on the fire and sent up into the realms where he could become the Baba to the king and queen. And then there's a story of a slave who was owned by the Grand Vizier of a very great Sultan. But this slave escaped. But it wasn't very long before he was recaptured again and hauled back to the palace, where the Grand Vizier was so angry that his slave had escaped, he demanded that he be executed. Well, when the slave was hauled up in front of the Sultan, the slave said to the Sultan, "Great sire, according to the laws of your land, a slave can only be executed if he commits a murder. And since I have not committed a murder, my execution is unjust. But if indeed I am to be executed, I demand that you allow me to fulfill the act which would justify my death. So I demand that you allow me to kill the Grand Vizier." So the Sultan turned to the Grand Vizier and said, "Well, what do you think about this?" And the Grand Vizier, "Let him go, let him go, let him go." And a final story which seems to be quite different to those which have a similarity with these two. And that is a short story about a man who was at the bottom of a hill with a need to take up a cart of sesame seeds to the top of the hill. It was far too difficult for him, the cart being very heavy with the weight of the sesame seeds. So 2 men came along, and the man asked, would they help him to get his cart of sesame seeds up to the top of the hill. "Yes," they said, "but what will you give us in return for our help?" And the man said, "Nothing." So they put their shoulders to the cart, and the 3 of them hauled the sesame seeds up to the top of the hill. And the 2 men, now sweating, one of them said to the man who owned the cart, "Well, now I demand that you give us what you said that you were going to give us." And the man said, "But I told you I'd give you nothing, and so I give you nothing." And the man replied, "But nothing must be something, so I demand that you give me nothing." And his companion said, "You stupid fellow, don't you realize what this man has been saying? He said he would give us nothing, and that means no thing." So with these 3 simple stories, that are ingredients in our pot that's been created here in an endeavor to answer the questions that have been posed and are the subject of why we're here.